Greetings and warm welcome, fellow 2-channel viewers. My name is Jason and this is 2-channel listening. Thank you for coming back for another episode. For this week, I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I have in the past because I have an entirely different experience to share with you in covering off on the Matrix Element I network streaming DAC. Now, with this particular DAC, I decided to purchase it based on two criteria. I have been in the hunt for a specific network streaming DAC that is one of high quality and what I would consider still for me in that budget range, anything that is below the $1,500, anything that's below $1,500. I found this on Audioquest for roughly $850 as a secondhand purchase to me. And the other big thing is that I watched the really excellent review of Thomas in Stereo where he covered off on the Matrix and had a lot of good things to say about it, and he had a really good good experience with it. I, on the other hand, for the last 6 weeks, have not had a very good experience with the Matrix Element I, and you're going to have to take that with a grain of salt. It absolutely could be related to this unit. It could be related to the particular network storage that I use. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. Now, I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details. You want to see all the specs? Boom, here they are. You can view those specs as you please. If you want to stop this right now and look at the details of what this Matrix includes, have at it. I'm going to continue talking and moving forward with this review. So, my own setup. This was a painful setup process. Most DACs, they do have some drivers that you have to plug in order for them to play, specifically if you're still using the USB hard connection to a laptop. Or in other instances, most DACs, streaming DACs these days, have a smartphone app that you would download. So I downloaded the MA Smart app for my Apple. I have an Apple 11. And everything was a-okay from that point forward. The GUI is pretty good for what it is, and the step-by-step process for setting up the Matrix Element DAC in of itself was very clear. The instructions were very concise, and you actually have very intuitive, well, I wouldn't say intuitive, there are a large number of sub-menus on that app, but nevertheless, they give you an incredible amount of information to go through and to search through so that in your setup process, you know exactly what you're supposed to do with your network, what buttons you're supposed to be pushing when, how you set up the streaming in the Wi-Fi, and it has a very visual step-by-step process to follow. All right, no issues there. So I have a Synology 216 Play. It is my network storage that I've had for several years. That was my go-to process. I would download anything from hdtracks.com, or I would buy the latest CD and I would rip it and store it to my network storage. I have a red drive, two terabyte red drive within the 216. And to me, it's one of the best, it's just one of the best formats that I've used prior to all of the latest network DACs. Now, in trying to source and find that, there are additional submenus that you must accomplish in order for the Matrix and the actual MA Matrix app to find it. And it goes all the way down to when you're swiping, you have to put in the specific IP address and you have to use the password setup to find your network storage. So in going through that, it did not work for me. I reset my networks, I reset my NAS, I opened up additional sharing folders, I did hard connections direct. Let's put it this way, on 2 separate days, 4 hours each day. A total of 8 hours was spent going through all the submenus, going through the Synology website and how I formatted my network storage to see if there was something I had selected that was blocking it or not allowing the matrix to connect to it. Regardless of quadruple checking the IP address, I even reset the password to my network storage to ensure that I was entering the right password in, and it just would not connect with the matrix no matter what I did. So after 8 full hours of going through all the processes, going through the submenus, going through the troubleshooting, going through the forums, going through the help, I gave up. I gave up on using my Synology 216. I had remembered that I have an actual backup to the Synology, and that is the WD MyBook, and this is another 2 terabyte backup direct USB storage, an outboard storage. I connected that to the matrix, and for about 60 seconds, the matrix was starting to read it. I was starting to see some of the files show up, and then it dropped off. I could not explain it. It just stopped working and it dropped off. So I got pretty frustrated with that. Then I also remembered I have an even older backup storage. I have a Toshiba 500 gig, basically just a USB storage device. And unfortunately, at some point, Amanda wiped the drive out. So all of the old music that I had on there is no more. And so therefore I connected it to my laptop, and I have, I would say, probably 20 HD albums that's on my current laptop. So I moved those over to the Toshiba, connected it in, and voila, the network actually started working immediately. It started finding the files, it aggregated them, it downloaded all of the actual album art, and I was up and running. And I'll share with you some of those screenshots from my Apple iPhone of what that looks like. Now, there's a really interesting, and I'm going to say weird, attribute to the matrix. It can be a hardline Ethernet connected unit, or it can be a Wi-Fi only connected unit. So the internal cards do not work in tandem with each other. If you're going to use this as an Ethernet device and have it connected hard to your network, that card will then need to be selected, and it goes through a multi-second process of turning on the card and sticking with just your hard network connection. If you go to use the Wi-Fi side of it, it'll turn off the network card, the Ethernet card, and turn on the Wi-Fi only card. Again, it will not work both ways. So just the way that this is formatted, you cannot use both at the same time. And that led to some other frustrations that I have. At no point was I able to bypass and just use a Wi-Fi connection and bypass the actual given built-in Spotify, TuneIn, Tidal applications. And I could not bypass those to just use it as a Wi-Fi device with the app to stream Amazon HD. It would not find the device for my Amazon HD account to stream to the matrix. And so that again was very frustrating. The two number one reasons why I bought it, it would not work for that. And that brings me to this other reminder for you, public announcement. I had reviewed this 2 weeks ago, and I have to bring it out again as a reminder for the budget-friendly folks out there who are on extremely tight budgets. I reviewed this OSD Audio Nero Streaming HD DAC, integrated amplifier, over 2 months ago. This is a Class D 25 watt per channel. It's just a tiny little integrated, but it has both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capability. This is my bedroom amplifier. This gets used every single week. I watch some movies in my bedroom, and I do a lot of my music streaming from the bedroom specifically to this device. Now, at any given time, and I will show screenshots of this app at work for the OSD and how easily it operates. So while this has so many multi-stages to get set up, I would turn on the OSD app. I would go to find my NAS. It is very descriptive. It's only 2 swipes to check to it. And every single time, no matter what was going on, no matter how many times I reconfigured, reset the password on my Synology, this $245 Wi-Fi integrated amplifier had no problems finding the network storage and playing from my Synology. And this thing worked flawlessly every single time. That in itself makes me very frustrated with this Matrix, that a $245 product is that reliable and worked every time for me. And I bought that off of Amazon, if I hadn't already mentioned that 20 times. So, how could I use this? The only way that I was able to use the Matrix reliably, consistently, is either with transferring music to the Toshiba or just using it as a straight USB hard connection, which is what I've done for the last 6 weeks. And running my 10-foot USB cable from my laptop to my listening space or my listening chair, and having that cable run between my toes the entire time. Very frustrating. Nevertheless, how does it sound? And here's where I'm going to give full credit to Thomas at Thomas & Stereo for nailing the sound signature of what the Matrix Element I does for you as a standalone DAC. Now, he talked about it being a little bit cool and a little bit analytical, and that these Chinese DACs have a very specific flavor where they use good chipsets and they go for total dynamic range. And for all of the ASR fans that love what paper specs look like and having top dynamic range goes, this made, I think it was the middle of Amir's chart, and so they love to look at charts, and they love to look at, you know, the actual technical specs of a DAC chip's application. So if you like that and you like analytical, then you probably will like the Matrix Element I. Now for me, I used 3 different integrated amplifiers. I have my Red King Premium, which is a 12-watt Class A Triode. I have my Peachtree Nova 150, and I have my good old Unison Research Unico P. This is how I can summarize it across the 3 integrated amps. This is the sonic signature as I experienced it for the last 6 weeks. And I have to go with the camera analogy. The camera analogy is this. When you're taking all your photos and you're playing with the different lighting, you're using cool lighting, you're using warm lighting, and you're done with it and you go back to the editing stages and you're using your photo editor. This DAC is the photo editor, and what it's doing is it's automatically adjusting the photograph for you from the exposure stage. So you take a nice balanced warm photograph, and the Matrix Element I is taking the exposure and it is just tuning it all the way up, not quite to max, but is tuning it all the way up so that your naturally warm picture is getting brighter and more focused, and the warm sections of it, if like say you have a nice wood table photograph, it is tuning it up, taking the warmth and brightening it to the point where the wood no longer has a natural visual tone to it. It's washing out the grain. You're seeing extra grain, you're seeing hyper details, but it's not a natural presentation. That mahogany is not that lit up. That mahogany is not that detailed when you're just visually looking at it. It has a lower, warmer tone when you're in front of it, but as you're filtering it and as the Matrix is filtering the music, it has that exposure tuned all the way up. Now, it's not strident. It's just as Thomas said, it has a very cool upper lit approach to everything, and it's not a balanced DAC. It sacrifices some of the textures for the details. It's very on the analytical side of the spectrum. And that brings me up to something else that Thomas had said, that I realized it mostly when I was using my Triode amp. So my Red King Premium Triode, again 12 watts. The RCA output on the matrix is 2 volts. And Thomas had stated that if you're trying to get the most out of the volume, if this is going to act as a preamp, you want to use the balance outs. The balanced outs actually operate at 4 volts. Now that came into play when using my Triode integrated amplifier, because no matter what, the 12 watts are there all the time, and you make the most of them how you can. But with the 2 volt output, I was running out of room to be able to turn up the volume and use my Triode to the max capability, even with the Tektons, which are 97 dB or 98 dB efficient speakers. I was running out of headroom, and there was even a little bit of flatness when using the RCAs connected to that. I remembered I happened to have these Cardus conversions, so I was able to use my my Audioquest balanced cables with the Cardus converters, use the balance out to the single-ended in to the Triode, and those additional 2 volts made a world of difference of giving me more headroom with my Triode amp, and it did what I would expect it to do, was give me the best balanced presentation of the 3 integrated amplifiers that I have. So with the matrix being all the way tuned to the right on exposure, my Triode tube amplifier was able to bring that back and insert some of that sweetness to tone that down so that I had more of that balanced presentation. And that ended up being the best combination of all of my integrated amplifiers. But I noticed that for me being a hard rock guy, I was able to enjoy my hard rock a lot less than I normally would. The jazz, the folk sounded really good, very detailed. You're hearing, you know, with the strings, you're hearing the rosin on the bow, you're hearing that harshness, you're hearing that, just that context to the recording itself, and again, the hyper detail. But I also noticed that my least favorite combination was my Unison Research Unico P, which is a hybrid integrated with a tube preamp. It is already a mid-range, upper mid-range focus integrated, so connected to the matrix that's also upper lit. That was not a very good combination. It, to me, especially with my rock, was less pleasant, not something I could listen to for long periods of time. And I ended up not using the Unison Research for the majority of the 6 weeks. I went back and forth with using my Triode and using my Peachtree Nova 150. Those were the best combinations. And so really what it comes down to is that you're going to have to be really careful on what combination of preamp and amps that you're using with the matrix. If you have a darker amp or you have a darker preamp, this would probably work really well to insert some of that analytical details into your system to tune it up a little bit. But if you already have kind of an amp that's at the higher end of the treble range, of the mid range, you're not going to want to pair it to this. You're going to get overexposed, and you're going to have a lot of hyper forward details coming at you that's just not natural, and it's not listenable for very long periods of time. You'll get that oh wow factor on the first few songs and go, wow, I haven't heard this, or this detail is even sharper and this is even more delineated. But over time, you know, your ears naturally know that that's not natural. Your brain knows that that's not natural, and it gets very fatiguing. Not strident fatiguing. It's just not a, for me, I should say for me, take it with a grain of salt. It wasn't my flavor of listening to playback. Of the 20 standalone DACs that I've owned, This one is at the bottom of one of my least favorite DACs. And again, I will say that because of the combination of the integrated amplifiers that I have, and that I already have highly resolving Tekton Uruz with the ribbon tweeter, from a synergy standpoint, this wasn't a good synergy. So of those 20 standalone DACs, this wasn't the best combination with the gear that I have today. It's not to say that this wouldn't be the perfect DAC for some of you out there that have darker sounding electronics or inefficient speakers that could use a little bit of tuning in the mid and upper range. This may be the perfect DAC for you, so just understand what I'm saying. The gear that I used for my review for the last 6 weeks, it required me using my tube amplifier to inject that sweetness for there to be good balance and for me to have these long listening sessions at night. As for that chipset, so I have the Yamaha CD2100 SACD player that happens to have a Sabre 9016 chip in it. The Nova 150 has the 9018 chip, and these have the 9028 chips. So there's going to be chip snobs out there that goes, oh, well, it has the superior chip, especially compared to your Yamaha. That's not how it works. So the Yamaha, while it was a $3,500 device when it was first introduced, Yamaha spent a good deal of time on the engineering side to get the power side right, to make sure that it has clean power and that they were extracting all of the specific right protocols from that 9016 chip. And as I can attest, this $1,100 unit versus my $3,000 Yamaha, the Yamaha has the better balanced presentation. It is a more natural sounding DAC, and I could just listen to it with all of my genres for extended periods of time, and I didn't have any of that genre fatigue for those of you that like to have, play really fast, hard rock, and the drum kits are going crazy, the guitars are screeching, and that's when things tend to really fall apart with lesser systems or with particular chipsets that are turned up too much. So I just want to also bring that to the forefront, that as compared to an unfair fight to a DAC that's nearly 3 times the price as the Matrix, I feel I'm getting my money's worth from the Yamaha when it comes to its balanced presentation. On another note, because I will be now immediately selling the Matrix, I'm done with it. It is not my flavor of choice. I did purchase an NAD C658, and that is their newer streaming DAC. And it does as advertised, or it should as advertised, that it will also stream Amazon HD, which means a lot to me since I had switched over from Spotify a long time ago from the onset of Amazon HD being released. And I look forward to breaking that in for some time to come. For those of you who are following weird forums with fruit shirts, I did what I could. I'm wearing my lemon shirt to make lemonade out of the Matrix. These are not pineapples for those of you who are challenged visually, and for those of you who are weird about fruit shirts and the meanings behind them, this is just a lemon shirt, and I thought it made sense to wear my lemons with my lemonade. It means nothing more than that to a few of you out there who've sent me some very bizarre emails. Yeah, what you derive from certain fruits. Anyway, in other news, I posted this morning by total accident. I had a pair of 1990s Sony SSM3s just show up in the trunk of my car. Thanks, Dave. Like, I really needed another pair of speakers right now. Everybody's got that friend that sits there and texts you, hey, check these out. And I sit there and go, I probably shouldn't answer that text because I know it's going to be something that I won't be able to resist and therefore I have the M3s that I will be spending some time with and going down somewhat vintage street. Oh, I hate to say that. That just means that I'm getting older to call something from the 90s getting close to what would probably be vintage stereo at this point. And in other news, these gorgeous Italian beauties behind me, these slimline opera mazes, I will be breaking these in for several weeks to come. Mr. Ben at the music room happened to have one last unopened pair of these. And again, I was made an offer I could not refuse. The Opera Mesa line, or I should just say the Opera audio speakers, they have a partnership with Unison Research, and for the longest time I've been wanting to pair Opera speakers with my Unison Research integrated and share my findings with you on, is there a specific synergy with those two brands? Is it real or is it hype? I did start the YouTube membership program that's just a cheap $2.99 per month to give priority status to my subscribers. And I am looking for any suggestions from the YouTube community. What works well? What do you like that Ron's doing? What do you like that Randy's doing? What do you like that Thomas is doing, etc., for their particular memberships and exclusivity, doing, you know, the live shows, doing other such venues. I got a lot of feedback on the first actual stereo recorded review of the Tektons in the zoos. With over 100 votes, an overwhelming 66% of you said to continue to record in stereo and give you a little bit of taste of what the different speakers sound like with the various gear that I have. So I will definitely do that moving forward. When I do the review of the Opera speakers, I will also make some recordings. I know that there's different music genres that everybody's been asking. Not to make those things last an hour because it takes a lot of work to switch things back and forth. Nevertheless, I am open to some requests, but at the end of the day, I'm picking what sounds the best in my room. So there you have it. If you want to do it differently, start recording on your own. Other than that, thank you, folks. I wish you all well and that you have a wonderful week. And until next time, keep enjoying that music and keep spinning those CDs. Thank you.